Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our Ask Me Anything. Today, our topic is about the glories and the challenges of being an Agile product manager. My name is Roger Snyder, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing at 280 Group, as well as a Principal Consultant and Trainer. I'm going to give folks a moment to join, and then I'm going to invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves to you. And we will then start by working through the so many questions that we received ahead of time. Then we'll leave time at the end to answer questions that you enter in the chat box. So I would encourage you now, if as we're rolling, you don't see your question being answered, or you've got a burning question you'd like our panelists to address, just type it into the chat box, and we will have plenty of time to be able to answer those questions as well. So let's get started by introducing our panelists. Greg, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Greg Cohen, Principal Consultant at 280 Group, and I've been in product management like 25 years now, starting in medical devices and diagnostics, moving into software as a service and consulting for 15 of those years. So I've seen a lot of different contexts. But I got introduced to Agile in 2000, and it transformed what I could do as a product manager, and I just never looked back. I became a huge advocate for it, and wrote a book in 2010, Agile Excellence for Product Managers, and I am just a real champion and passion of Agile and what it can do for your team.
Thank you, Greg, and thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Ron, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, so I'm Ron Lichty, and I cut my teeth in tech as a programmer. I programmed for about 7 years, cut my teeth managing. So I pivoted to both managing and product management for about 2 years when I got hired into Apple to manage a product management group in development tools, product management and product marketing. I shifted back to programming, and they made me a manager at Apple. I shifted back to programming, they made me a manager at Apple. I've been managing Director of Engineering, VP of Engineering, occasionally VP of Product. Ever since, I ran into Agile for the first time in 1999 in the form of extreme programming. I was intrigued, but when I ran into Scrum in 2002, I was truly thrilled. I've been passionate about Agile since then. And I wrote one of the very few books on managing software people and teams 8 years ago. It came out, and it's just came out in the second edition called Managing the Unmanageable. And the second edition has a new chapter, If We're Agile, Why Do We Need Managers?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ron, for joining us today, and you're bringing a multitude of perspectives to the conversation. Very much appreciated. Susannah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Susannah Axelrod, and I cut my teeth on the business consulting and marketing side, and subsequently worked in product marketing for Intel. And then my first software job was actually an Agile product management job in 2005. And everyone I was working for Intuit, everyone was talking about Agile as this new thing. And I didn't know any different. I thought, well, this is just how you develop software. So ever since then, I've been in product management, leading teams in product management, always either in organizations that were Agile or were going through Agile transformations, probably even more of the latter, because it seems like everyone's kind of always trying to raise their game. Mm-hmm. And then this year in 2020, I kind of went over to the dark side and went into consulting and training with 280 Group.
Thanks for joining the panel. Looking forward to getting your insights. And Joe, last but certainly not least, would you please introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Joe Ghali. I have not written any books on Agile product development, so sorry to disappoint anybody on the call. I've been in product development for over 15 years, primarily as a product manager or as a product owner. I came from IT. That's where my background was. I reached a boiling point where I wanted to be the one that helped solve the problem. So I moved over. I worked in online travel for 11 years, and it was there that I went on the brand side and started managing online products there, and really never looked back. I worked at Reader's Digest for a few years on a couple of products there, and then financial services, and now I'm a product coach at Kimberly-Clark here in Wisconsin.
Fantastic. Great. And as a coach, you're helping teams make this transformation, right?
I am. We are. We are. It's we want to be the one to disrupt, and so it's a journey to try to get teams that have been practicing traditional project management and get them to think more on the product side. So, but it's fun. My days fly by.
Never a dull moment, right?
Never a dull moment.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all of you for joining us today. And let's start to the questions. We got lots of great questions submitted ahead of time. And so what I've done is I've gone through the questions and just kind of sorted them and also kind of organized them where there's a common theme. So I will be shouting out the folks who submitted the questions. So pay attention, maybe your name will come up. And but I'm going to try to tackle them in groups. So we'll be able to handle these questions more effectively. So the first question came from Becky A., who's from St. Paul, Minnesota. And she asks, in what part of product is Agile most beneficial? So let's see, maybe Greg, you can kick us off on this one?
Yeah, I think this year totally speaks to the power of Agile. We live in what we call a VUCA world, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I can tell you that curbside pickup was probably not on Home Depot's roadmap in January. And when I look at what Home Depot, Walmart, just go through the list of retailers that had to create entirely new services, and and speaking to them, one major retailer, their product managers were out there helping to fulfill the orders to really understand the needs. Mm-hmm. And you can't react that quickly if you are not an Agile org and set up to work in an Agile fashion.
I love that. Yeah. Being able to react quickly. So let's see, Joe, you're going to add a little something to this one?
Yeah, I think for me, what I love about it is the ability to get closer to the user. I think, my IT background, I learned the hard way. We come up with really great ideas and software and solutions, and we get it out there, and it was crickets chirping, and it broke my heart. Right, because we'd all work really hard on these laborious business requirements, and then we'd put it out there, and there were crickets chirping. So for me, it's the ability to dig deeper into the problem, because ultimately I love that we're problem solvers. We're like kind of superhero-ish a little bit if you think about it, right? We're here to help alleviate a pain point. And I think from that standpoint, when you start to think like that, when you start to like wrap your brain around the problem, everything else, it becomes, it's easy, right? You just got to remember to focus on the problem itself, and it really, that's what makes it so enjoyable.
Right, staying in the problem space. That's awesome. Great. All right, well, let's move on to the next question. And this one was from Nicholas B. from Barcelona, Spain. He's just started with Agile career-wise and in his organization, and has tailored sort of a proto-Agile process for the organization while learning what Agile actually is and getting the organization to adopt this new methodology. And he asks, do you have any tips for a beginning Agile practitioner? And Susannah, you want to kick us off on that one?
Any tips for beginning Agile? Well, so one of the main things is really make sure that you get some training, and that you get training in teams, and really get your entire organization educated. If you have any ability to kind of evangelize that and get that to happen. I've worked with a lot of teams that like have this sort of knee-jerk response, like, we don't like Agile, we don't like process. And it's like, well, have you ever actually been trained on it? Do you know what it's supposed to do for you? Do you know? And a lot of the time the answer is no, like it's just easy, or I read a book. But I think it's hard to really understand in depth how beneficial it can be for you if you don't really go through a good round of training and coaching.
Right, and Ron, you've had a lot of experience with this as well, right?
Yeah, so I can't emphasize what Susannah just said enough. And this may seem self-serving because I train both teams and executives in Agile. but the ability to get teams aligned around an agile process is just stunning. I've come into teams all the time that maybe a third of the team came in from some other organization where they were doing something that was called agile. A third of the team has read a book on agile, but they're all different books. And those people who came in from other teams, those are all different teams. And now, and a third of the team is trying to learn what agile is from the other 2/3. And so you get this really broad scattering of ideas of what agile is. And what we really need is to come together around what agile we're going to do, and what that's going to look like, and how we adapt it to our organization and our problems and our customers and our products and our focus. And boy, that alignment is can be just stunning. And then in addition to that, those of you who are product managers and product owners get some additional product in Agile training on top of that. But the first thing is get all of your team as a team trained so that you're all aligned.
And so some consistency in that training is what I'm hearing is really valuable, right? You know, there are several different ways to get this training, and of course 280 Group offers this training as well from a product manager and product owner perspective. But what's important is to get everybody starting from the same set of terms, right? Same set of areas there. I don't know, Greg or Joe, if you guys want to add anything.
You guys hit the nail on the head with that one.
Yeah, I think well covered. So dive in, get started.
Here you go. I like that.
I will say one other thing. You know, teams and individuals mature, and the first part is just going through the practices and taking those learnings, and then you begin to understand really how Agile works. Mm-hmm. So books are only going to get you so far. You have to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Just get
and it's a journey.
Right.
Yeah.
It is definitely a journey, that's for sure. Yep, that was my experience as well. So then the next set of questions all kind of circle.
Thank you all.
I even joked about this in the, oh, you're welcome, Nicholas. I even joked about this in my invite that, you know, there's often some questions about the product manager and product owner roles, right? So Perry Ann S. from Morrisville, North Carolina asked, what are the unique and shared responsibilities between a product manager and a product owner? How do you ensure that the product owner can represent the interests of the product manager on a daily basis? I definitely want to make sure we can tackle that one. Another question from Adina R. was, is it effective for PM to also play the product owner role? So the question of, can one person do both? Then there was a question of, how do I transition from being a product owner to a product manager? Or is that even necessary? Can you do the responsibilities of product management as a PO? Right? So that also hits at that question, right? So several different folks asked this question. Let's see, Joe, you want to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, you know, and I think the first part of the question from Perry was the unique and shared responsibilities. So I always think about wordplay, right? Mm-hmm. So when I say product manager, I think roadmap. And when I say product owner, I say backlog. Like if you want to just keep it like super simple, that's a delineation, but it's not a wall. So I stress the differences because, right, the day-to-day responsibility of the product manager is you're out there interviewing, shadowing, asking questions. You're trying to uncover, you're trying to be future focused on you're trying to predict the new opportunities that you want to uncover, the problems that you want to solve. The product owner, their day-to-day world is in the how, right? So the product manager comes in with the what, the why, the who, and the product owner is the how. How are we going to do that, right? And so the important piece to note here is, and again, a delineation, not wall, is the problem. The problem comes from the product primarily. I'm going to say primarily, not all the time. Primarily comes from the product manager. And the solution is going to be delivered by the product owner. Many times product managers get tripped up where they feel like they have to do everything. They deliver a roadmap that's a list of features. Well, that's not a roadmap. A roadmap's a list of capabilities. You have a vision and you want to tell a story on how you're going to achieve that vision, right? Now, the analogy I give to people though is the product owner and product manager, they're like Han Solo and Luke Skywalker for all your Star Wars fans out there, right? They're connected at the hip. They're not going to fly the Millennium Falcon by themselves. They're going to do it with a crew, right? Chewie and Leia and the whole gamut, right? Because the reality is a roadmap, right, also has influence from the product owner. It has influence from the engineering manager. It has influence from the team. Because what you're doing is you're delivering value, and then you're watching that value, and then you're taking that feedback, and that feedback's going to influence decisions that you make from a day-to-day basis. So, you know, I always say when we launch new products, it takes a village. And I mean, it literally takes a village. And there are even folks that aren't on the team, like, you know, but they may be subject matter experts like legal, compliance, risk, customer service, sales, marketing. These are people that you're going to interact with. And really, the product owner, they're the ones that they're going to reach out and understand, when do I need to reach out to these different stakeholders and subject matter experts to help answer questions within the organization. So there was a question on, you know, what's the transition? Well, the transition is really, where are you passionate about? You know, if you're passionate about asking the question and wanting to know the why, well, then that's where the product manager role is. But if you're in that role and you'd rather be in the providing recommendations and opportunities, well, that's where the product owner role really comes into play. Many organizations they have it as the same person. And that's really challenging, because the product owner, they're in the day-to-day Scrum ceremonies. They're the ones that are building the backlog. They're effectively making sure that the team is consistently delivering value. So it's challenging. And that's why some cases you have a business analyst may play the role as the product owner alongside a product manager.
Right, right. Others want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, so I'll throw out the notion that I look at product management as this very large umbrella that is in touch with customers and bringing customers essentially into the room, whether it's our organization or whether it's our team. And the difference is a product manager, that what typically gets called product managers are bringing the customer into the organization. And what's typically called a product owner, which I think is a subset of product managers, are bringing them into the team.
Mm-hmm. Right. Good point.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting how I really think we talk about this in basically every class, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
It's every course that we lead, every flavor. And I think it's one of the most reproduced diagrams we have that Venn diagram of product manager, product owner. That you can find anywhere, like not just 280 group materials, but it's in a lot of blog posts and material out on the web. But so this is kind of a never-ending topic. And I think, you know, that one of the best descriptions I've heard is that the product manager is the job and the product owner is a role. And the same person can have the job and do that role, but you're going, you know, what to watch out for is you're going to be really, really, really busy. And I love, like Joe, I love your analogy of flying the Millennium Falcon, because the role, I think the same person can do that role if it's sliced appropriately, right? So, and also if you have a lot of support from the team. I mean, you know, Chewie can fly the Millennium Falcon if Han is, you know, like in carbonite or whatever, right? It's possible to do it. It's just, you need a ton of support. All of those tasks need to get done.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, and the important piece here, and I think, you know, not just within the team, but within the organization, and we'll probably get to some of these questions later, is the alignment. It's about the transparency and the trust and even the humility that's needed to be successful, where, you know, the product manager may not have all the answers, right? Or the product owner may not have all the answers. It's being comfortable and confident in your ability to say, you know what, my software architect, my solution engineer, my engineering manager, they have some really great ideas. These are opportunities, I think, that are going to really help grow our product. And I think getting away from that's your job, or that's my responsibility, or that's on my job description, I think you're only going to go backwards in a team. And I think you win as a team and you lose as a team. And I think that's part of being successful in that vein.
Yeah.
Right.
And guess what? They can write stories too. I mean, anybody on the team can contribute, right?
Yep.
Greg, you want to back clean up on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just gets this idea, right, that the PM and PO, or not, one is tech-facing, one is business-facing, usually. And that was true in product management prior to Agile being introduced. And, you know, one is not better than the other. It's the one you're passionate about doing. And that more than that you should find a clear split in this one, it's, you know, if you look at the 280 Group's optimal product process, there's a lot of things that need to be covered. And I think it's less about who's covering them than ensuring they are covered.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I think, so I'm looking at the chat box, a couple of people have asked follow-up questions on this one. I'm going to tackle one of them, which was, okay, so Susannah talked about the fact that, you know, the PM and PO can be the same person if it's sliced the right way. Can you elaborate a little bit more? And what we're talking about here is if the scope of the product, and you can do this multiple ways. I'll give you one example only. If the scope of the product is somewhat limited, suppose it's an internal product where your customers are other folks, in other PMs, other teams inside the organization. You're writing a foundation layer, you're writing a toolkit. Those kinds of things can be well suited for a PM-PO responsibility to be combined. There are times though, if you've got, you know, $100 million business and multiple channels that you're dealing with, so you're getting input from direct sales as well as input from online as well as internal sales, then probably there's too much on one person's plate to do both the PM and the PO role. Someone is going to need to be more business focused and serving those constituencies as a product manager to let the product owner then be able to manage the backlog and handle all of the interactions and make sure everybody's writing the right stories and all of those things are being done correctly. So I hope that helps answer that question a little bit more for the person who asked it, right?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And one common dysfunction I see that I'm sure Ron and Greg and Joe will agree with is, you know, thinking that you can stretch a product manager and or product owner across multiple teams. So I've seen a lot of organizations where like, hey, you can manage I mean, it's, forget it, right? Then the workload is overwhelming, even if you split the role, honestly, because there's so many meetings and rituals and backlogs to support.
Absolutely. So I was gonna,
Can I agree with that? No.
I knew you would. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think that a humming engineering team will run a single product owner ragged. Because once the team starts humming, the product owner's got the responsibility to keep detail at the top of the backlog, to keep those stories at the top of the backlog, be ready for planning, to be able to vet new stories that are coming in, to be able to keep the backlog groomed, to be able to run acceptance tests on user acceptance testing. They've got so much, and they need to stay tuned into the customer, and that's just a huge job. I think it is the challenge that Agile puts to product managers is they don't get to write all the requirements up front. We just get the features down and the detail for the most valued features, and then we get started.
Absolutely. So there's one more follow-up question though that I want to follow up on here, and then I think we should move on to the next set of topics. Is there a reporting line between PM and PO? And if yes, any recommendations on the staffing model, i.e. number of POs to product managers? Greg, tackle that one?
Yeah, that's not seen sort of reporting relationships. You know, I think they're really peers, but you know, PMs are very focused, particularly like an enterprise, on release and large feature level acceptance criteria. The PO is down working with the team. They're making sure stories and sprints are meeting their goals and criteria. And I think, yeah, you know, I'd say the guidelines are maybe, you know, 2 to 4 POs per PM, which would be very context dependent.
Again, yeah, it's going to be about the size of the business. Can it support that number of folks, right?
Right.
And the complexity of the different aspects of the product, certainly. But yeah, I think that's a good guideline, certainly. So I was going to paste in a link on this topic to a blog post I wrote a couple of years ago on this very topic for follow-up if you want to read more about it. But then Peter Zimmer did that for me. So you can go in the chat box and see that's already been pasted as a reference for folks to look at. So let's keep going because we have so many questions we want to handle here. The next set of questions are about how do we help folks who don't understand the way Agile works. And so a couple of different questions that came in here. So KJL from Carrollton, Texas asked, how do you overcome, and I like some of the other synonyms he used here, defeat, conquer, executive purse string holders who still think in terms of waterfall, big bang versus Agile. That was one of the questions. Emily C. from St. Petersburg, Florida asked, our 130-year-old company is uncomfortable having roadmaps without hard dates. They want 2 to 5 year projections. How can we get our internal stakeholders on board with Agile roadmaps? And she's heard the advice, you have to prove it and it takes time, but what do you do in the meantime? So that's another aspect of this. And then Tom R. from Chicago asked, how do you effectively manage expectations from customers, sales, and management that look for commitment to provide a set of functionality by a given deadline when you have Agile teams that measure success one sprint at a time? And the last part of this was, what's the best strategies for roadmap planning and building great business cases when working with an Agile development team? So you all wanted to chime in on this one. So I'm just going to throw it out there and say, who'd like to go first on this one?
Well, I can go first. I think the biggest thing here, at least for me as a PM, is there's 3 levels of planning that I'm doing. There's project level, release level, and then you get down to real sprint level and what's going on there. And for each of those, I am running estimates. And if you're using Jira, it's really hard to get the data out, but you need to look at how you estimated that over a previous project and how much work you got done against it. And that's sort of the big thing. And then you get what I call the signature of the team. You know, usually just managing scope on a project is, most teams can do that well, and they can even do these high-level estimates fairly well. What I see gets most teams is both, the emergent requirements and how many things you didn't know was coming, but in particular, things that take you off the roadmap that are hard to predict. And you really need to understand how much of your sprint is going towards those to help you manage it. And I think often when you do that analysis, you see we're never going to get, if we keep behaving the way we're behaving, we're not going to get to our roadmap. Right. And Ron, I thought maybe you should talk about a bit pointing. I know you've talked a lot about that sort of very eloquently and how to use those techniques.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I too frequently see is that I see teams only estimating the next sprint and not working for their and not estimating their whole backlog. Steve Bachman 20 years ago gifted us with an entire backlog relative sizing method that in just a few hours gives teams the ability to identify epics that will need to be split, to give product owners a relative idea of story size, to enable predictability multiple sprints out based on velocity, and to serve as a check to peg sprint plans on actual team velocity. And as I said, the first problem is that too many teams are just estimating the next sprint by taking just a few hours, and it's actually a chartering exercise to snake all of your stories based on size and get relative size for all of those things. It informs those of us who are managers, those of us who are product managers, as to which things that we were wrong about, that we thought they were small things, but they're really big things. We thought they were big things, and our team knows how to do them really quickly, to get an idea, to get a shared understanding of what the whole project is, which we walk out of the room with, which is what we always wanted when we wrote hundreds of pages of requirements that ultimately too few people read. And by the time they got to the end, didn't understand what was at the beginning. It's just this marvelous process for both understanding the project and or product, in getting insight from the team as to what the relative size of all those things are. And it's been too often left by the wayside. Steve Bachman's 99-cent ebook is on Amazon. Nice. My blog posts, my last blog post was about doing pointing relative in remote settings.
Wow, interesting. Well, Ryan, if you send me, you can actually throw the URL to that blog post into the chat for everybody to be able to read. That would be awesome.
Sure.
And what I'm hearing is, yes, get going on the sprint in front of you, certainly, but then take the big picture, and that's how you can, with this relative sizing technique, be able to build a roadmap. and yet still have the ability to be agile in the sense that as the market changes, you can adjust that roadmap, which is ultimately one of the big benefits that we're looking for, right? Is that I hate to use the English word agility instead of using the technical definition, but that is, as a product manager, one of the big benefits we're looking for. Susannah or Joe, any other thoughts?
Go ahead, Susannah.
Oh, sure. Well, so, I liked something that I think you said earlier, Ron, which is that, to the woman who asked about the company being uncomfortable not having dates, is to look historically at, have we hit our dates in the past? So, it's like, what's the definition of insanity is like continuing to do the same thing over and over, even though it's failing. So, there's, you kind of have to look at your track record. But one thing I was going to suggest, and I think this applies to whenever you're trying to make a big change or a change in mentality, is to find a small and less risky area of the business where you can try out a new method. So say a small companion product or a new product where you can say, let's not have a 3-year date-driven roadmap that we know is probably, we're not going to meet it, right? Let's try doing this in an agile way. Let's make an outcome-driven roadmap where we're talking, much more about in 2 years, kind of what we're going to deliver to the customer, in 12 months, what we're going to deliver conceptually in terms of an outcome versus a release plan.
Right.
And let's try it in an area where people aren't going to like, oh, wow, that's our flagship product, and we've already promised things to our customers for next month.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
There's a lot of magical thinking out there that waterfall worked.
Yeah. It never did, right? It never ever did.
I frequently ask developers and product managers alike, so those of you who worked in waterfall and either wrote or received 100+ pages of requirements, what percentage of those did you actually deliver?
Mm-hmm.
And the numbers I get are the typical range is between 15 and 45%. And think about the amount of waste for those of us who are product managers in writing that other 65 to or 55 to 85% of those requirements that don't actually get delivered. Huge amount of waste of our time, and the time of the team of over-architecting for that stuff, for the team trying to understand, the engineering team of trying to understand that stuff, the testing team writing test plans for all that stuff, just massive non-useful use of time.
Right, it's a fair point.
I think, also just for me, dates absolutely do matter, especially in the enterprise world where you are needing to meet contractual commitments. But I've always found that it's easier to manage risk using an agile methodology than the waterfall methodology, because the waterfall just gives you this sense of confidence, which then doesn't show up to be true. And that the most important thing you can do as a product manager is really know your customer, because if you know your customer, that lets you create, sort of been coined the MVP, the minimum viable product. But the way we manage to the date is to reduce scope. Mm-hmm. And the way we can reduce scope is we have to really know who our customer is.
Right.
Yeah. I'll totally agree with that. And just add the backlog, the notion that Agile introduced of backlogs, which is totally changeable, totally Agile mechanism for making sure that we're delivering the highest value stuff, the stuff that's going to delight our customers most. Is always, engineers walk up to the backlog and they know what's at the top of the backlog is going to deliver the most delight to our customers. That's the stuff to work on.
Right, absolutely. So I just want to echo something that Susannah said earlier, in that when I was running product management and building product roadmaps, I would create product roadmaps that the first quarter roadmap was pretty darn specific. And then the next quarter roadmap, okay, not quite as specific, but pretty much you could, to the sales force, say, you can count on these benefits are going to be delivered. And there may be 1 or 2 pieces of those benefits that get delayed if we have to limit our scope, but the core benefits, core value are going to be delivered. And then I would go to half year. Okay, then in the 6 months that are from 6 months to 12 months, here's the bucket of things that we are thinking about, and I'm not committing yet to a precise date, but we know that these are the key benefits, to your earlier points, all of you, that we know our customers need the most. and we are working on those things. And then beyond 12 months, it would simply be a concept list. I wouldn't even put it in a timing framework. I would simply say, we know these are the benefits we need to be delivering next. And in fact, sales folks, marketing, I want to invite you to get more customer feedback from me, from them, for those lists. And so when you build like an 18-month roadmap like that, which is the most I ever thought was any at all reasonable to try to have something to say meaningful, you're both able to show a vision to your customers that you get it, you know what they need, you know where the company is headed and the value it's going to deliver, but in the shorter term, provide the precision that's needed to be able to get customers to sign up and want to buy your product. And so I found that that was a reasonable way to balance what we've just been talking about. Like, you say anything more specific out 12 months, you're not going to deliver that anyway. Right?
It also gives a lot more freedom and autonomy to the teams also, that if we have, an outcome that we want to deliver to our customers in the 12-month time frame, whatever longer term time frame, the team actually gets to work on what's the feature, like what is the output or the project, whatever it is, that's actually going to get our customers that benefit. So there's no reason to be, defining that a year in advance.
Right.
So there's a couple of tricks to get in. I know we got some more topics to cover, Roger, but I think it's important day to day, take advantage of a couple of things at your disposal. So for you Agile teams out there, you have something called a sprint review. Make that that's probably, as a product manager, the single biggest meeting you're going to have on your calendar, because that's where you're going to invite stakeholders to review, have the development team review the value what that was delivered. You're going to review what's in your backlog, right? And so that constant engagement, like there was a question on how do you, set expectations, how do you evolve an organization that's not used to doing it? Like stay away from just even using the words agile. Stay away from the words that maybe they hear from their nephew or their son that are like, to them, they just think it's a fad. Just stick with, every 2 weeks, we're going to show you what we delivered, and we're going to walk you through our backlog, and we're just going to use this as an opportunity to get some feedback, right? So that creates the alignment and the clarity, because 99% of the time where people get really grumpy is they feel like they're not in the know and they don't feel like they had a say. So the other piece of it is teaching leadership and stakeholders that a roadmap is not a document in concrete, it's dynamic, right? So you do something called a product scorecard. So every month you provide an updated view of your roadmap, but you talk about what changed, why, and then the metrics that support what you've delivered. And so if you're doing the sprint review and you're showing the value and you're constantly keeping people updated with your backlog, and you're doing a scorecard, right, and you're constantly communicating what's changing and why, and you're showing that you're reacting to the customer, you're effectively practicing Agile without actually telling them that you're practicing Agile. You're basically using common sense, but you're being a little bit more methodical in the way that you communicate with people, and you're giving them the opportunity to understand and see the changes that you're making. Because again, a lot of the reasons that people balk at it is because they feel like they're not part of the decision-making process, or they feel like they're not seeing what's being delivered. If you provide that constant dialogue, a lot of that fear and anxiety will go away.
Yeah, I agree. The interesting thing is Joe, what you were just describing, this bringing people in, getting stakeholders to be able to see how this all works, was also being talked about in the chat box, where one person just asked, how do I set expectations correctly? And the other person replied to them, communication. So this is great. We're having multiple streams of conversation on the same
Transparency.
Topic.
There's nothing to hide. And even, like road mapping tools, there's a lot of really great road mapping tools. I'm not going to say the one that I use right now, but a lot of them allow you to dynamically share that roadmap. And, I used to, as a product manager, every day I log in, it's the first thing I do. I look at the feedback I get, I publish it, and then anyone that's received a view of my roadmap, they can see what's going on. They don't have to search their inbox or SharePoint or email me. They can just refresh their link and see what changes or what's happening in the roadmap.
I love it. Yeah. All right, let's keep going. We have a one-hit question here, but it's a popular one from Dave L. in Seattle, Washington. How do you tame the hippo? Greg, you want to take that one? And you might want to explain what a hippo is too.
Yes, right. So HIPPO is an acronym for highest paid person's opinion, and we certainly know, that usually conveys us, usually it correlates with seniority, right? So someone very senior who's also very outspoken. So first off, the HIPPO is always tough, so I don't want to be pat in this answer at all. I think, the immediate thing you can do as a product manager is bringing data, right, and focusing on outcomes. And Jim Barksdale had one of my favorite quotes, which is, if you want to talk data, let's talk data. If you want to talk opinion, let's go with mine, right? So unless you have the data, it's going to be hard to tame the HIPPO. The other thing that I've done, though, is, take the HIPPO out of the room and explain to them how they're affecting the team dynamics. And recently at one client, where it wasn't just there was multiple HIPPOs, and they all had a different vision for where the company should go. We did a buy the feature activity for allocating the budget, and that got everyone to hear each other. I also asked the primary HIPPO in that group to hold back a little, to come in more at the end, but that brought alignment to the team. And we had 9 months where what our priorities were not questioned.
Right. So in fact,
we were able to focus.
Right.
And that's a beautiful thing for a product team.
Absolutely. So this question, there was actually a question that came up right now. It sounds like the process you're describing assumes the product manager has a continued budget for development and is responsible for ensuring they're working on it, rather than having to compete for development team resources against fellow product managers. And I think the process you were just describing that allows multiple product managers to make their bid, build their business case, make their bid for why they should be able to develop the thing they're proposing, helps with that process.
Exactly, and it lets everyone see why what is being funded is being funded.
Right. Again, transparency too. Right. Yeah. Great points. Fantastic.
Yeah, I think there's a contextual element to this too, which is, and so the one that Greg went to is awesome. The prioritization one, who gets the priority, is huge. There's also a HIPPO one of, well, make your team work faster or harder or deliver more, or and I think we ought to bring rules of thumb or metaphors sometimes to those kinds of things. And one of the ones I use for that is adding paper to a printer doesn't make it print faster. We can stuff more stuff into the sprint, but that's not going to deliver the stuff in the sprint. Our team works at the speed that they work at, and in fact, lead projects are often the multitasking is one of the worst enemies of software development teams, regardless of whether they're using Agile or whether they're using something else. HIPPOs are often responsible for interrupting the team, and interruptions are changes of context. Are one of the huge deficits for teams in bringing down their productivity, not increasing it.
Right. Excellent. So the next question I wanted to tackle actually is contemporary, because we got this both from someone ahead of time and now somebody's asked it here, right? So G. Acura asked, and also now from today, Adrian B. asked, are there any good case studies or references you can speak to for getting Agile practices adopted to hardware-heavy products, where time cycles are longer and iterations are capital intensive? And the other person asked much the same question. And they added, can you reference a well-known Silicon Valley company that uses Agile for hardware products, and talk about what framework they might use? Any best practices, case studies, or good examples?
Am I a cliche if I say Tesla and SpaceX?
No, it's kind of young to be cliche about that, right? I know.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know if there are case studies written about them, but I mean, you can just watch what SpaceX is doing, and you can tell. I mean, the iterative prototyping, they go from to prototype number 60 in 6 months or whatever. So they're really clearly following Agile methodologies from everything I've heard.
Right. And then Ron provided a link to this, which I'm going to paste into the chat box, of some white papers on Agile processes for hardware development. So this will be helpful, I hope, to everybody. Ron, you want to say a few words about it?
Yeah, I think that so we were having this conversation actually before all of you, our audience, arrived, about the fact that Agile And you can say Scrum, or you can say Kanban, but every implementation is going to be different. You are going to adapt it to be effective. The challenge that I see more often is that teams have adopted practices and not actually become agile. What you want to be is become agile and become an agile that's appropriate to your organization. Now, hardware is maybe the ultimate example of this, because hardware is quite different, and Scrum has been applied to hardware. Now, the iterations, the sprints are much longer. For hardware, there are different things, and I think getting one of those experts in hardware Scrum or hardware Agile in. So the link that Roger's pasting in is an excellent white paper that was written by TCGen's John Carter with C-Prime's Kevin Thompson. They've looked at what are the best practices in using Scrum and using Agile for hardware, and I we want to stand on the shoulders of our of people who've done it, and that's actually the question. And I think finding those and they are out there, and those white papers and writings are out there.
Fantastic. I think it's a great resource for folks to follow up, and I put it into the chat box. One of the online questions that I'd like to tackle is, we're stuck in this typical doing Agile within the waterfall cycle. We need the big bad business case, and this is from John K. We need the big bad business case to be defined, including full scope of work and time to complete, before it gets approved to move into the dev process. They are uncomfortable with Agile stating that will deliver value for the customer, not necessarily what you thought they would want for the full scope of the project, and are scared of us going over budget. Anybody want to tackle this one?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it starts with the customer, right? I mean, that's, you're making an investment, and you have to have KPIs that you're going to measure success against, and you have to be able to demonstrate the success against those KPIs that you set forth. So I know I keep on going back to it, but sometimes it just takes it to maybe simplify what you're trying to achieve and say, look, these are 3 or 4 most important personas, and this is the market segment or the opportunity that represents itself, and showing, doing the journey maps with those users and understanding where the expectation and the experience don't match, right? And then showing the value in achieving or solving those problems, and then prioritizing those values. A lot of time where a lot of organizations get hung up is people believe roadmaps are made based off of opinion, right? Someone wants to do something because someone said so, or they thought it was a good idea, or because they've been at the company a long time. And I think you can't dispute data, right? So if you tell the story with, here are users, here's their journey, here's the value, here are the problems we've identified, here's the value in solving it, and showing the value. Like, I think, I don't know if it was Susannah or Ron or Greg had said, take a smaller product first, do a test run first. Because I know, trust me, right? Theory sounds great. Theory sounds great. We're all really smart. And you can take our word for it, but until you actually practice it, I think you have to do a lot of work, not just practicing Agile, but it's the preparation and setting the expectations with the right people, and showing them the value. If anyone has any kind of common sense, and they want you to deliver value, if value is driving revenue, well, do you want to see revenue in 2 quarters, or do you want to see revenue in a year? Right? When do you want to start getting your checkbook? When do you want to start reducing costs? In a year or in 2 months? So you have to, it's painful, guys. It's so painful. Like, the first time you do it, you have to just take a step back and not only plan the roadmap and do all that and do the analysis, but you also have to do a coaching to your leadership and your stakeholders, and use data to show that you're making decisions, and say, give me 6 months. I'll start delivering value. Make sure you have, what does success look like? What does definition of done look? I'm using all these buzzwords, but you just have to kind of put together a roadmap of your plan. Like, that's kind of what you have to do is you have to not only have the roadmap for the product, but you need a roadmap for your plan so that you're organized and thoughtful. And if you can do that, well, then you're going to walk into somebody's office and you'll be like, God, Joe knows what he's doing because he's put a lot of thought and work into this plan. I think we should give it a shot.
I think we're in a unique time in 2020 to to put the kibosh to we know what the product that our customers need a year from now is, because as Greg pointed out, who knew that Home Depot was going to have curbside delivery, and who knows what it, and I don't, all of us are shaking our heads for all of the change we've seen in 2020, and I don't think it's stopped. And the notion that we can predict what the world is going to be like a year from now, I think it's a really unique time to say, hey, look at what's happened already in 2000. This is all happened in this year.
Right.
It's all happened in the last 6 months, and we couldn't have predicted it.
No, completely agree. I want to move on to a couple more questions that were asked a little bit earlier in the panel live. So Mason D asked a question with small companies and teams. So we don't have a dedicated team yet, and I'm having trouble balancing operational needs that break the Agile cycle and generate immediate needs and new development projects which follow the more standard Agile cycle. I'm having challenge balancing that, and generally different projects competing for the same Agile resources. Any suggestions on how to tackle that problem?
Yeah, I've been in organizations with that challenge, and even when we had that earlier question about how do you do planning and knowing how many story points or stories are going against roadmap versus these emergent operational needs, you got to track that, and that ultimately does provide the data. That helps you build a justification to expand team size, or at least get agreement on the priorities that one of those two groups is going to get neglected.
Right.
So I think it starts there, but ultimately, this is an anti-pattern, right? You don't have a dedicated team to a product, right? You're still in this working sort of very project mode, and you have a lot of emergent requirements coming in that your team has to address that really should probably be addressed by another team that's purely focused on that.
Right, right.
When I feel the questioner's pain.
Yeah, I do too. When I was in a small company, we did come up with a practice where we had one person who was handling these immediate fire drills, if you will, problems, and this one person was the strike team person. And we actually ended up adding another person, and then we called them the strike team because there were two. But you had the strike team, and they weren't part of the Agile cycle. So even if you had, say, 7 engineers, you could have 5 in the Scrum team and 2 on the strike team. And the 2 on the strike team would handle the immediate stuff so that you could preserve the Agile. So I'm talking only 7 people here, and yet you could still do this. And then to make it more interesting, we did require rotations so that you'd only serve on the strike team for 6 months, and then you'd get to go back to the Scrum team, and somebody else would come out at a sprint boundary, of course, but somebody else would come out and they'd join the strike team for 6 months. And to some of the other comments and questions, this actually gave developers a much better insight to what customers' real pains were, because they were then on the front line for those 6 months helping tackle those problems, and gained a better appreciation of what the product manager is dealing with all the time. So I found, even like I said, only 7 people, that split worked really well and brought a lot better understanding to the whole team over time. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense, Roger.
Yeah, and it worked really well. I was pretty surprised.
I've seen that pattern elsewhere too, and it works.
Yeah. Lisa, we've only got a couple more minutes, but I want to try to tackle a couple more questions. So briefly, if anybody can answer Lisa M's question, as a product manager, what are your top go-to tools or methods to effectively and passionately, I like that word, convey to the team the vision and the why for what you're working together to achieve? So we talked a little bit earlier about PMs being market-facing. How do the PMs stir everybody up, get people excited?
I mean, I think it's providing, so I don't think I would call it a tool, I'd call them techniques. But many times where teams get frustrated is they feel like the PM is on their own and they're just coming to them and they're being order takers. And I think some of the techniques are making sure you have some sort of cadence around sharing your roadmap and even walking them through your journey of coming up with what items or what problems you want to solve, Right. So I think engaging with them, asking them for their input into the roadmap. And then really, again, I'm going to go back to that sprint review. That sprint review is so important,
Right.
because that's where the development team, the delivery team gets the opportunity to brag and show stakeholders the value that they've delivered.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, and then there are like other, techniques where leveraging even getting the PM to be engaged more with the team, with like having one-on-ones with the Scrum team itself and getting to know them and creating relationships. I mean, so much of the motivation and the ability to execute isn't so much in the ceremonies and the workflows. It's in the fact that you're really able to build stronger relationships and understand everybody and understand how they want to work within the team, and acknowledging their ideas and evaluating and being sincere about it, but being humble. So I would say those are probably the keys. Again, there are a lot of really great product management tools out there. So you can hit me on LinkedIn and I'll share that outside of this event. But, there are a lot of really good ones out there that allow you to provide that visibility where the team doesn't feel like you're off on your own and then they're just order takers. Because if that's the case, all bets are off. You're going to have dysfunction instantaneously.
I think also get them in touch with customers also.
Yeah, inviting them to the events.
Right.
We used to do that. We used to live stream usability sessions, or we used to do there's some tools where you can do some use cases and, or with customer service, create a bridge and say, guys, we're going to shadow our call center for an hour. Here's the bridge line. Feel free to call in while you're coding and you can listen in. Wow. Again, just creating the lines of communication and transparency so that people don't think there's some secret way or, you're trying to hide stuff from them.
Right. One of the things I had my product managers do was we instituted quarterly brown bags where every quarter a product manager from a different product line would present. This wasn't just to the development team, this is to the whole company, where they would present an update on the state of the gaming market today was one of them. Another one I would always plan in late January was and this one I'd have all the product managers come, what did we learn from CES, from the Consumer Electronics Show this year, and have them take turns in their different markets and their different product lines, explain again to the whole company, not just the developers, here's what we learned, what our customers want, what we see competition doing, and here are the implications for our business going forward, so that everybody gets that valuable context, that why, in a public open forum, and get into a rhythm where, look, product management on a regular basis is updating the whole company on the why.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, we've had a lot of great questions. I'm afraid that if I tear open one more question, we're going to run over. But you know what? There was one little one that we can tackle. Between managing the requirements, maintaining the product backlog, maintaining the roadmap based on sales feedback, guiding the development team, and more, which one's the most important duty of a product owner?
So I think for me, there isn't a single most important duty. It's going to depend on context of how your team is structured and where you even are in your product life cycle. I find if I have offshore teams, I need time on actually grooming backlog and getting shared understanding and putting really good acceptance criteria in. If I have sort of the case I was talking about before, the HIPAA, and that the executive team is not aligned, I have to devote more time to stakeholder management.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very specific to the problem you're needing to solve at that time based on team structure and life cycle.
So your priorities shift over where you are.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think if it's a newer product, it's having a backlog, having a really bountiful backlog, especially if it's newer. Whereas if you're a mature product, I think that one of the biggest challenges is fending off PLC or, ad hoc requests, or not even fending it off. I apologize for saying that. Just having that balance of roadmap items in your backlog that support the strategy versus items that are coming in from feedback from customers or even technical lifecycle work that you have to balance. It's a juggling act, knowing what the priority needs to be, but making sure you don't lose sight of the prize. You have to make sure you take care of your product and execute those security patches or whatever is needed to keep the healthier system.
Great point. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists today. Joe, Ron, Susannah, Greg, thank you so much for your wisdom. And I want to thank everyone who joined us today. I think this was a very helpful conversation. We covered a lot of ground, thankfully. And watch out, participants, for the email that we'll send to you afterwards, because we did record this session and it will be available for you to refer to in the future. We hope that this was helpful in guiding you as product managers and product owners to be able to harness Agile and get more glory and less of the frustration of Agile development. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.